Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. 6 months ago, I bought what I thought was my dream house. I'm a professional landscaper and hardscape designer with my own small business, and this property had everything I was looking for. The house itself was nice enough, but what really sold me was the corner lot with this absolutely beautiful side yard. The previous owner had put in this gorgeous custom flagstone patio and planted this massive Japanese maple tree that must have been 30 years old. The whole setup was exactly the kind of showcase piece I could use for my portfolio. The house was in one of those newer HOA neighborhoods. I'm not usually a fan of HOAs, but the restrictions seemed reasonable enough, and honestly, that side yard was worth putting up with some bureaucracy. The realtor mentioned that the community had a pool and some common areas, which was fine by me. I figured as long as I kept my grass cut and didn't paint my house neon green, we'd all get along just fine. What I didn't know at the time was that the community pool sat right next to my property line and parking was apparently a huge issue. The pool area only had about 15 official spots, but during summer weekends, you'd have 50 or 60 people trying to use the facilities. People were parking all over the street, on people's lawns, basically anywhere they could squeeze a car. The HOA board president lived in the house directly across from the pool entrance. Her name was something generic, but everyone just called her by her first name, and she had very strong opinions about the parking situation. From day one, she made it clear that she thought my side yard would make the perfect overflow parking lot. I should have seen the warning signs earlier. About 2 weeks after I moved in, she knocked on my door with this fake friendly smile and a plate of cookies. She introduced herself and started going on about how wonderful it was to have a landscaping professional in the neighborhood. Then she casually mentioned how the previous owner had been difficult about community improvements and how she hoped I'd be more neighborly. I was polite but firm. I told her I was planning to use the side yard as a showcase for my business and wasn't interested in any community projects involving my property. She kept that same smile, but I could see something shift in her eyes. She left the cookies and said she understood completely. But I had this feeling the conversation wasn't really over. Over the next few months, she brought up the parking situation at every single HOA meeting. She'd go on these long rants about how inconsiderate the pool guests were, parking in front of her house and making noise. Then she'd look directly at me and mention how much space was going unused in the neighborhood. I kept my mouth shut most of the time, but finally at one meeting I had to speak up. Just so we're all clear, I said, keeping my voice professional. As I've mentioned before, my side yard is not available for any community projects. She gave me that tight little smile and said, "We'll take that under advisement." The way she said it made my skin crawl, but I figured that was the end of it. That was my first mistake. In early July, I got some incredible news. I'd been selected as a finalist for a National Landscape Design Award, and they wanted me to attend this big trade show conference. It was a huge opportunity for my business, the kind of thing that could really put me on the map. The only downside was that it was a 10-day trip, including travel time, right in the middle of summer. I spent weeks getting ready, making sure all my current projects were either finished or could be handled by my crew while I was gone. The day before I left, there was the regular monthly HOA meeting. I almost skipped it since I was busy packing and getting last-minute things sorted out, but I figured I should show my face since I'd be gone for a while. The meeting was pretty routine until near the end when she brought up the parking problem again. She was really laying it on thick this time, talking about how the situation was getting worse every week and how the board needed to take decisive action to protect the community. She kept glancing at me while she talked, and I started getting that same uncomfortable feeling from before. The board has been exploring several options for addressing this ongoing issue, she said, shuffling through some papers. We've identified a few potential solutions that would benefit the entire community. One of the other board members asked what kind of solutions she was talking about, and she waved her hand vaguely. Various possibilities. We're still evaluating the best approach. I should have pressed for details, but honestly, I was tired and my mind was already on the trip. When the meeting ended, I went up to her and reminded her that I'd be out of town for 10 days. "Oh yes, your business trip," she said with that same fake smile. "How exciting! I'm sure everything will be just fine while you're away." Something about the way she said it should have set off alarm bells, but I was too focused on getting ready for the conference. I went home, finished packing, and caught my flight the next morning. The trade show was amazing. I ended up taking second place in my category, which was way better than I'd expected. I made some great contacts, learned about new techniques, and came home feeling like my business was really starting to take off. I was exhausted from all the networking and presentations, but I was excited to get back and start implementing some of the ideas I'd picked up. I landed on a Sunday evening and took a cab home from the airport. It was getting dark, but I was looking forward to sitting on my patio with a beer and going through all the business cards and brochures I'd collected. As we turned the corner onto my street, I started looking for my house, and that's when I saw it. My beautiful side yard was gone. Where my custom flagstone patio used to be, where my 30-year-old Japanese maple had stood, where I'd had carefully planned flower beds and professional landscaping, there was nothing but fresh black asphalt. 10 parking spaces painted in bright white lines running right up to the foundation of my house. They'd even paved over the expensive shrubs I'd had planted along the side of the house. I sat there in the cab, staring at what used to be my property, trying to process what I was seeing. The driver asked if this was the right address, and I just nodded and handed him some cash. I got out with my luggage and walked around to what used to be my side yard, hoping maybe I was having some kind of exhausted hallucination. Nope, it was real. My entire showcase area had been bulldozed and turned into a parking lot. There were even little signs marking it as community pool overflow parking with hours of operation listed. I stood there for probably 5 minutes, just trying to wrap my head around what had happened. Then the shock wore off and I felt this cold, professional anger settling in. I've been in construction and landscaping for 15 years and I know exactly what something like this costs. I also know property law, surveys, and permits, and I was pretty sure I knew exactly who was responsible for this. I went inside, dropped my bags, and immediately called her personal number. She answered on the second ring, sounding cheerful. "Oh, you're back. How was your trip? Doesn't the new parking area look wonderful? It's such an improvement over that messy garden you had. Much more functional for the community." I took a deep breath and kept my voice level. "You paved my property. You destroyed thousands of dollars of custom stonework and killed a protected species tree." She actually laughed. "Don't be so dramatic. The board had our own guy look at the property lines, and he confirmed that area has always been a common easement. It's HOA property. We just reclaimed it and put it to better use. You really should have read the bylaws more carefully." "I did read them," I said. "I also have a certified plot survey from when I bought the house 6 months ago. You are 14 feet inside my property line. I'm going to give you one chance here. Send me a copy of whatever survey you think you have and show me the board vote that authorized this project." Her tone shifted then, getting nasty. "We don't answer to you. That land belongs to the HOA, and if you try to interfere with our property improvements, we'll fine you for obstruction. This matter is closed." She hung up on me. I sat there holding the phone, and honestly, I started laughing. Not because it was funny, but because she had no idea who she was dealing with. See, when you're in my business, you deal with property disputes, easements, surveys, and permits all the time. I know exactly how this stuff works, and I know exactly what happens to people who do unpermitted construction on other people's property. I made 3 phone calls that night. First, I called the surveying company that had done the original survey when I bought the house. I explained the situation and paid their emergency rate to come out first thing Monday morning and restake my property line. Second, I called a certified arborist I work with regularly. That Japanese maple had been a specimen tree, probably worth $15,000. I needed an official assessment of the loss for insurance and legal purposes. Third, I called my lawyer. Not because I was planning to sue right away, but because I wanted to make sure I handled everything by the book. He told me to document everything, get the surveys done, and send one formal demand letter before taking any action. Monday morning, the surveyor showed up at 7 a.m. By 8:30, we had bright pink stakes marking my actual property line, and it was exactly what I'd suspected. The new asphalt parking lot extended 14 feet into my property. The surveyor took photos of his equipment at work and gave me a written report confirming the encroachment. While he was working, I walked down to the city planning office. I pulled the original development plats for the neighborhood and confirmed that my survey was correct. The HOA had no easement, no rights to my property, and no legitimate claim to the land they'd paved. Then I asked the clerk to check if any permits had been pulled for paving or construction at my address. She ran the search and came back shaking her head. "No, sir. No permits have been filed for any work at that location in the past year." Perfect. Not only had they trespassed and destroyed my property, they'd done unpermitted construction work. In our city, that carries some serious penalties. I went home and drafted a formal letter to the HOA board. I kept it professional and straightforward. I gave them 48 hours to present a plan for complete removal of the asphalt, soil remediation, and full replacement of all destroyed landscaping. I sent it certified mail and also emailed a copy to every board member I could find contact information for. The response came back Tuesday afternoon. Not a letter, just a short email from her. "We received your letter. Our attorney says you're wrong. The parking lot is staying. We consider this matter closed." I read that email twice, then leaned back in my chair and smiled. Okay, I said out loud to my empty house. Let's do this the fun way. Wednesday morning, I formally hired my own company for what I called an emergency encroachment removal and restoration project. I scheduled my entire crew for the coming Saturday along with equipment rentals, a full-size excavator with a hammer attachment, professional jackhammer crew, 2 dump trucks, and a bobcat for cleanup. Friday afternoon, I applied for and received an emergency permit from the city for debris removal and restoration work. I also had one of my guys make a large, professional sign that I planned to put up at the end of my driveway. Saturday morning at exactly 7 a.m., my crew arrived. The excavator came rumbling down the street on a lowboy trailer, followed by the dump trucks and my work van. I'd timed it perfectly for maximum impact. I had my guy install the sign right at the edge of my property where it met the street. Notice: private property restoration in progress. We apologize for the noise. All complaints regarding this necessary work may be directed to your HOA board. Then we fired up the equipment. If you've never heard a professional jackhammer crew and an excavator with a hammer attachment working at the same time, let me tell you, it's loud. Gloriously, professionally loud. We started at the back edge of the paved area and worked our way forward, breaking up the asphalt in manageable chunks. It took about 15 minutes before she came storming out of her house in a bathrobe, screaming about the noise and demanding to know what we thought we were doing. 3 other board members showed up within the next half hour, all yelling about vandalism and destruction of HOA property. I was standing there in my work clothes with a clipboard, supervising the removal, when she marched up to me, red-faced and furious. "You stop this right now! You're destroying community property! I'm calling the police!" "That's fine," I told her calmly. "I'll be right here." She stormed off to make her call, and I went back to directing my crew. We had about half the asphalt broken up when 2 police cars arrived. She came running over to them, still in her bathrobe, pointing and shouting about vandalism. "Officer, he's destroying our parking lot. This is malicious destruction of HOA property. I want him arrested." The lead officer was a guy I'd worked with before on some city projects, and he recognized me. He walked over and asked what was going on. I handed him a folder I prepared with everything he needed: my property deed, the certified survey with the pink stakes clearly visible, before and after photos of my destroyed patio and landscaping, the city report showing no permits had been pulled by the HOA, a copy of my certified demand letter and their dismissive response, my emergency permit for the removal work. "Officer," I said, "the HOA trespassed on my property, destroyed thousands of dollars worth of landscaping without a permit, and refused to fix it. I'm a licensed contractor, and this is my crew. We're legally removing the illegal structure they built on my land." He looked through everything, walked over to check the survey stakes, and came back shaking his head. He turned to her with a look of complete disgust. "Ma'am, it looks like you're the one who committed property destruction here. This gentleman is working on his own land with proper permits. You need to go back inside right now, or I'm going to cite you for filing a false report and harassment." Her face went completely pale. She started sputtering something about HOA authority and community property, but the officer cut her off. "Ma'am, I don't care what your HOA thinks it can do. You can't destroy someone's property and then call the police when they fix it. Go home. Now." The other board members who'd been standing around looking supportive suddenly found reasons to be somewhere else. She stood there for another minute, looking like she wanted to argue, but finally stomped back to her house. My crew worked all weekend. Saturday, we broke up and removed all the asphalt. Sunday, we excavated the contaminated soil underneath and pulled out the destroyed tree stump. By Sunday evening, we had a clean, level patch of dirt where the illegal parking lot used to be, and 2 dump trucks full of debris heading to the construction disposal site. It was beautiful professional work. Not a trace of their parking lot remained. Monday morning, I sat down at my computer and prepared an invoice. I itemized everything with the kind of detail that only comes from 15 years in the construction business. Emergency weekend crew mobilization, $4,500. Heavy equipment rental and operation, $6,200. Asphalt and contaminated soil removal, 12 tons. $5,800 debris hauling and disposal fees, $3,000 professional arborist assessment of specimen tree loss, $15,000 administrative and legal preparation fees, $1,750.48 total, $31,250.48. I printed it on my company letterhead, put it in a professional envelope, and hand-delivered it to the HOA office. 3 days later, I got a call about an emergency HOA board meeting. Apparently, receiving a $31,000 bill for parking lot removal had gotten their attention. The meeting was packed. Word had gotten around the neighborhood that something big was happening, and pretty much every homeowner showed up. I sat in the back and watched as the board tried to figure out how to handle the situation. She stood up and announced that they'd received what she called a fraudulent invoice from me, and that the board would not be paying for my vandalism of community property. I stood up from the back of the room. "Okay," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "See you in court." The room went completely quiet. You could hear people shifting in their chairs and whispering to each other. A few people asked what was going on, and she tried to explain that I'd destroyed a community improvement project. One of the homeowners raised his hand and asked if the board had pulled permits for the paving work. Another asked about the property survey. A third wanted to know why no one had been notified about a major construction project. She couldn't answer any of their questions without admitting what they'd done, so she kept trying to deflect and talk about community improvements and HOA authority. It wasn't working. You could see people getting more and more suspicious about the whole thing. The meeting ended without any resolution, and I went home to call my lawyer. We'd already been preparing for this possibility, so it didn't take long to get the lawsuit filed. This wasn't small claims court territory anymore. We were talking about major property destruction, trespassing, and recovery of substantial costs. The discovery phase was where things got really interesting. My lawyer subpoenaed all the HOA's internal communications about the paving project, and what we found was even better than I'd hoped. There was an email chain between her and the other board members from while I was out of town. The smoking gun was a message she'd sent 2 days before they started the paving work. "The new landscaper guy is out of town for 10 days. If we get this done while he's gone, he'll have no choice but to accept it. Sometimes it's better to ask forgiveness than permission." Another board member had replied asking about permits and surveys, and she'd responded that they didn't need permits for maintenance work and that she was confident about the property lines. There were also invoices from the paving contractor showing they'd paid almost $8,000 for the work. What was interesting was that the contractor had specifically noted in his estimate that no survey had been provided and that he was working off visual estimates only. When we got to court, the judge read through the email chain with this look of increasing disbelief. He didn't even let the HOA's lawyer finish his opening argument. "Counselor," the judge said, "your client has admitted in writing that she knowingly proceeded with construction on disputed property without permits or proper surveys. She then refused to remedy the situation when presented with evidence of trespassing. Are you seriously asking me to find in favor of intentional property destruction?" The HOA's lawyer tried to argue about community improvements and good faith mistakes, but the judge wasn't having it. The emails made it clear that she'd known exactly what she was doing and had decided to go ahead anyway. The ruling came down in my favor for the full amount of my invoice, plus my legal fees, plus punitive damages for what the judge called willful and malicious property destruction. The total judgment was just over $52,000. The HOA tried to appeal, but their insurance company refused to cover any of it. Since the board had acted intentionally and without permits, the whole thing fell outside their policy coverage. They were on their own. That's when things got really ugly for them. The HOA was forced to levy an immediate special assessment on every homeowner in the neighborhood to pay the judgment. $543 per household due within 30 days or face liens on their properties. You can imagine how well that went over. The HOA called an emergency homeowners meeting to explain the situation, and it was absolute chaos. When people found out they were being forced to pay hundreds of dollars because the board had illegally destroyed a neighbor's property, they lost their minds. One guy stood up and demanded to know why the board thought they could just pave over someone's yard without asking. A woman in the front row wanted to know why no environmental impact study had been done before removing mature trees. Someone else asked why the board had ignored their own architectural guidelines about community modifications. But the best moment came when an elderly man who'd been living in the neighborhood since it was built stood up and said, "In 40 years of HOA meetings, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen a board do. You destroyed a man's property, got sued, lost in court, and now you want us to pay for your mistake. This is insane." The motion to recall her from the board passed unanimously. Not a single person voted in her favor. Even the other board members voted to remove her. 2 weeks later, I got a certified check for the full judgment amount. I deposited it and immediately started planning the restoration of my side yard. This time, I was going to do it right. I designed a raised patio area with imported stone, featuring multiple levels and built-in planters. I found an even more spectacular Japanese maple from a specialty nursery, along with several other specimen plants that would serve as excellent examples for potential clients. The whole project was going to cost about $40,000, but between the judgment money and the business I'd gained from people seeing my work, it was going to be worth every penny. The centerpiece of the new design was going to be a low stone wall right along the property line, 3 feet high, built from the same stone as the patio, with perfect craftsmanship that would showcase my skills to anyone who saw it. And embedded in that wall, right where it faced the street, would be a bronze plaque with a simple message: private property, surveyed and certified. All trespassers and encroachments will be removed at their sole expense. The new HOA board was much more reasonable to work with. They apologized repeatedly for what had happened and even asked if I'd be interested in consulting on some legitimate community landscaping projects. I told them I'd consider it, but first I wanted to get my showcase area finished. Construction started 3 weeks after I got the check, and it was the most satisfying project I'd ever worked on. Every day, I'd come home to see my crew making progress on something beautiful and permanent, built exactly where that illegal parking lot used to be. People walking by would stop to watch the work and ask questions about the design. I ended up scheduling consultations with 6 new clients just from neighbors who saw what we were doing. Word was getting around that I was the landscaper who'd taken on the HOA and won, which turned out to be excellent marketing. The day we installed the bronze plaque was particularly satisfying. I'd had it custom made by a local artisan, and the lettering was perfect. Clean, professional, and absolutely clear about the property boundaries and consequences of trespassing. That evening, I was sitting on my new patio with a beer, admiring the work, when I saw the current HOA president walking down the street with a handful of no parking signs. The pool area was still causing problems, but now they were trying to solve it by restricting street parking instead of stealing people's property. She saw me sitting there and waved. I waved back and raised my beer in a friendly salute. The whole situation had turned out better than I could have imagined. My property was more beautiful than before, my business was booming, and I had a story that I'd be telling for years. Plus, every time someone in the neighborhood thought about messing with property lines or ignoring permits, they'd remember what happened to the last HOA board that tried it. As I sat there watching the sunset reflect off my new stonework, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad. Sometimes it's being a professional, following the rules, and letting other people's stupidity work against them. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, you get paid $31,000 to prove your point. The bronze plaque caught the last light of the day, and I read the inscription one more time. All trespassers and encroachments will be removed at their sole expense. Perfect. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This happened about 8 years ago when I was still working for a North American Class 1 railroad. I worked in IT, specifically in a department whose primary role was to generate metrics and regulatory reporting for the Surface Transportation Board and their ilk. Most of our measures were inward-facing, though, covering such things as volume, dwell, revenue, and productivity. This story involves a problematic dashboard in the last category, specifically a measure of the productivity of our unionized office workers. The managers loved it because it gave them a weekly graph of who needed corrective punishment for underperforming. Our toxic CEO of the day was all about punishment. They even had quotas to meet. It was in regards to this last one that, I'll call him B, made the short walk across to our building so that he could ask me about the metric. He'd just come from an uncomfortable meeting with his direct manager, who showed him how he was the lowest performing employee on their graph, by a wide margin. His manager told him to pick up the pace, or he'd face potential repercussions, possibly even a 1-week suspension. B came to me because he knew I had access to the back end of the metrics, and he wanted to know what they were measuring him on because he was never not busy. Some important background on B is that he was a very senior, conscientious employee. He had as much experience as the rest of his group combined, and he came to me because we went back about 20 years from my time in the union before I moved to IT. The job of their group was to work the queue. That is, go into the failure queue of events that had cacked for one reason or another, resolve the issue, and allow the automated functions to flow properly. A couple of trivial examples would be a train lift failing because the cars had not been properly reported into the customer's track, or conversely, they'd been reported in, but the customer had not electronically released them out yet. Because he had so much experience, B took it upon himself to handpick the really messy, time-consuming ones from the queue, ones where somebody had backdated events and it took some faffing about to figure out what was wrong and what needed to be fixed. Or where a conductor took all the paperwork home and forgot to update this tablet with the switching that he'd done. Basically, if it was something that might require phone calls and deep research, he would deal with it rather than let inexperienced folks struggle with it. I pulled up a pre-production version of the dashboard and scrolled through the source code to find the important bits. We discovered that it was looking for clusters of specific event types reported under an employee's user ID with at least a 2-minute gap between the clusters. He was puzzled over the last requirement, but I explained that it was so that a single train being processed would only count as one event. It might take a few minutes to fix the train, but the reporting was at the car level, and as long as no more than 2 minutes elapsed between the report on one car and the next, it would all count as a single incident to the dashboard. So, it doesn't look at how many records you handle, only that they happen more than 2 minutes apart. He paused for a moment before adding, "That's really dumb. They don't care about complexity? They're seriously just counting how many times a person clicks OK? Somebody could game that pretty easily if they wanted." He walked away without saying anything else, but I could see the mental gears turning. He came back to me a couple of weeks later to give me the good news. He'd gone from being the most underperforming person in his group to being their top employee by just as big a margin. "It's great," he told me. "Forget all the complicated crap. I'm just grabbing the biggest trains from the queue. I work one screen of cars, then sit back and drink my coffee for exactly 3 minutes before I process the next. I finally have time to complete the crossword puzzle in my paper." Sadly, the company attributed his miraculous turnaround to their draconian discipline practices, and never clued in that while their numbers went up, their actual productivity had tanked a bit. The only real consequence to him was that his job became a lot easier, and he got to slide into retirement on a high note. The next one is an entitled people story. So my job is basically digital customer service for Bloomingdale's, helping customers place his order and simple things as such, and letting them know the status of their order. So what really has me confused, and to have, just a little background story about me, I don't have a high-end retail background as far as working for big-name brands. Bloomie's is probably my first actual high-end department store job. Dillard's was my first, but I would really put Bloomie's above Dillard's. I would just like to come up here and just really vent and say the clientele of customers that shop at these places, the high-end stores, some of their personalities are very disgusting. Like, I seriously don't know how to put it. It makes no sense for the entitlement and stuck-up attitudes of grown people. I worked regular retail before getting into high-end, starting my first job at 16 at an amusement park. I'm well aware of customers overall in general, of the personalities and characteristics and things like that, but the high-end customers is such a different story. I had a gentleman who opened up a credit card with store. When you get approved, you have 2 days to use it. So a couple days later, the item that he bought, I would say is probably a 3-day difference, is part of a promotion where you get a gift card for how much you spend. So basically he calls in saying how it's not fair how he just bought this item and now it's part of a gift card promotion. And inside my head, I'm like, are you kidding me right now? Am I a ducking psychic like I cannot see the future? Even as an internal employee, we don't even know the promotions until they happen the day of. So basically he was screaming and yelling at me that he would like the gift card because he is entitled to it, and I'm just scratching my head in confusion because, you make a purchase, you continue on about your life, and then also, who the hell spends $600 on a car seat? Like, I'm not understanding. Is it a spaceship? But other than that, I know, and we work hard for our hard-earned money, and spending on whatever you want, of course, I understand that and get that. It was just the audacity for the man to call in and ask for something that he bought before the promotion started. Oh, and I forgot to mention that he wanted the 25% discount and the gift card, and I'm just like, you gotta be ducking kidding me. I'm so thankful to, work remote and things of that nature, but it's just a customer interaction. He was screaming and yelling at me, stating how it was not fair that he was unable to get the gift card, and basically I gave him his option, stating he can make a return, do a repurchase for that same item, and then I can transfer him over to the credit department because they would be the ones to initiate the discount honoring it, and he was not having it, and kept me on the phone for at least 30 minutes fussing at me. And when you think Manger would help, they just said, give him the gift card for it. It's like, what's the point of sticking to policy procedures? When you go to management for an escalation, you end up backbending. I am well aware I do not own the company. I'm just there to do my job, collect my check, and be on about my life, but you just want to make sure that you do your job at least as accurate as possible. Anyway, thank you for watching.